mendelspod.com. Advancing life science research, connecting people and ideas.
Welcome to the program. Today we have a special edition here in the studio. We're joined by co-authors of a recent book, TechTonics, about the intersection of health and tech. First, he's the Forbes contributor and chief medical officer at DNAnexus, David Shaywitz. Welcome.
Great to be here.
And secondly, Q.
Perfect.
It is the venture Valkyrie herself, Lisa Suennen.
Very nice to be here.
So we had arranged for a swan to bring you in, but the swans were on strike.
That is a bummer.
And we heard it was over health benefits.
Oh.
So,
Today's show is sponsored by 23andMe, the leading personal genetics company.
welcome to Mendelspod to both of you.
Outstanding to be here.
This is such a pleasure. I want to talk to you about some things in the book. But first of all, what brought you two together?
We had a Twitter-based romance. We'd been communicating that way for some time, and David asked me to meet up. We
decided to take it to the next level.
We decided to take it to the next level, and we really just hit it off. We had a lot of interests in common and started collaborating and decided we would write together.
Values, ideas, thoughts?
Well, I thought that we really, I mean, the truth, I thought that we had a very similar sensibility.
What was in your Twitter romance? what was it around?
Well, I think that what I really appreciated was I thought that Lisa had an unusual sense of authenticity. I thought that she really described things in a way that didn't seem very forced or contrived, and really described at a very sort of gut level her reactions to things. And yet we came at things from a little bit of a complementary perspective. She has a lot of experience in the payer community and on the consumer side, and I came from more of a traditional biomedical background.
I think we had very common interests. I mean, we kept finding ourselves in the conversation about the same types of things about healthcare, the same types of issues, but from different perspectives, and sharing information together, and it just, blossomed into a great friendship.
And I also thought that it was from, that Lisa sort of had a pretty much, as you know, a zero BS type of
yes.
type of view.
Anybody who follows her blog knows that she's colorful but very direct.
I mean, sort of call things as she sees it, and she's, even for things like for healthcare, she's like, no one wants to be sick, obviously, but like no one wants to think about their health except when they're sick for the most part, and sort of saying these elemental truths that are absolutely right, but that no one really discusses. So I thought that was a particularly important point.
So the core question in the book is, how can the healthcare system work better for people? How can it work better for people?
Wow, well, it certainly could work better for people if the operations of healthcare were more aligned around common incentives and common interests to do things in everybody's best interest.
The incentives are way out of whack.
The incentives are way out of whack. And, there's a lot of effort now, I think, to try to coalesce those a little better, but the entrenched interests are really tough. So,
do you ever get intrigued by other health systems and think, oh, if we just had that here?
I don't. I mean, I think there's good in each system and many systems around the world, but if you really look globally, the problems are pretty endemic, and they're very similar, even in systems that are single-payer government-based systems where the rates of inflation are very similar, the aging baby boomer thing is very similar, a lot of issues. So I don't know that we should just, knock ours down and pick up Canada or, Switzerland or South America or, anywhere for that matter. I just think we need to focus on what can work better in ours.
Because we cover genomics a lot on the show, right. And so I've heard from several of the guests that the genomic revolution, genomic medicine, will probably really take off in other places first.
Well, we'll see. I mean, I think at the end of the day, I think there's a reason why people, when they're sick around the world, they come to the United States when they're very sick. I think the challenge is to bring that high level of care and make it accessible and available for more people, for everybody. But it's not that we don't have the highest level of care. It's just that it's not distributed in a probably optimal way.
Lisa, you came to you've been in Silicon Valley for a while.
Yeah, I grew up here.
She's a California girl.
I grew up here. My dad was an entrepreneur. He invented the ultrasound machine.
Really?
Back in the 70s when we moved to California when I was a little kid, for him to start his company and get funding and do that.
So this is in your blood.
I guess so.
You've seen the system. What about 2015 will be different than other years?
With respect to?
Healthcare, innovation, intersection with tech.
What's interesting, I think now, I don't know if it's 2015 per se, but just the current time, is that the level of interest from non-healthcare people to come in and try to help fix the system or at least profit from it.
So investors who
Investors.
were maybe investing other places before.
Yeah, I just came from a tech investor's office, a very famous tech investor's office, and they were, I was there for them to sort of pick my brain about the healthcare system, and they're trying to refine their investment strategy there. There's companies that nobody would think are healthcare companies, 5 years ago, even 1 year ago in some cases, and now making a big play, like Apple and L'Oreal, grocery companies, you name it, around the globe.
Right?
Disney, they've been big in healthcare for a while, though.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they did have a whole training program for hospital people to learn how to deal with people like humans.
Humans?
It's only been marginally successful, obviously.
Why are they starting there?
Well, you had a recent blog post about that, about how Lilly was trying to take some lessons from Disney to communicate what they're doing for kids with diabetes.
Yeah, exactly.
You're pretty new to Silicon Valley.
Yeah, I am new to Silicon Valley, but I wanted to amplify one of the points that Lisa was making. I think what also is different now is I think there's really been this, a lot of different factors have really started to coalesce. I think one, if you look at, we do talk about the genomics and the amount of sequence data that's available with NGS and the platform like DNAnexus to bring it all together. But I also think that if you look at the proliferation of wearables, and I really feel we're on to the next generation with that now, where it's not just, oh, here's a Fitbit, you wear it, isn't that fun? And people realize, okay, well, I like, how do people wear it for a couple of months, and then they're saying, okay, well, how has it changed their life? So I think people are really starting to try to look at it more carefully and try to say, how can we take all of this data, how can we really integrate it and really, combine? It's not like there's going to be some magic answer. Oh, this is the watch you wear that suddenly you're skinny. But I think that we're really, if only, right?
Yeah, a lot for that.
I think we all would. But really to say, well, how can we sort of intelligently integrate this? And one, create this connected health system, but two, integrate intelligently genomic data, wearable data, data from our medical records, other data, and not just sort of make it like a buzzword. Lisa, again, we had this great column about, buzzword bingo and digital health. But I think there's enormous potential to derive real value out of this and do it both sort of on a scientific level to say, okay, well, how can you subtype disease and to really sort of drive, solutions, but also how can you, there's a huge behavioral component, and I think there's a real opportunity, and Lisa talks about this very eloquently, to talk about how can we use some of the data from wearables, some of the, like the Ginger.io platform, some of the data maybe from
the what platform?
The Ginger.io platform. So the Ginger.io platform is from a company that kind of spun out of the Media Lab at MIT. It basically sits on your phone and it measures a lot of sort of behavioral characteristics, how much you interact with other people, how much you talk on the phone, and it's sort of being used increasingly and experimentally. They're evaluating it as a proxy for a lot of psychological traits, with the idea that, if, for example, it's possible that if you're going to get a bout of IBD, you might start to interact with people differently, and your phone and your patterns of interaction you may be able to pick it up long before you're aware of it. But your phone and by the accumulation of data may be able to find that. Or people who are depressed, before you recognize you're depressed, your phone may know it, or the collection of data. It sounds like spooky on the one hand, but on the other hand is if you have a chance to intervene, the whole issue with disease management isn't that, oh, having a nurse call every single person doesn't work, but it's not cost effective. You can't do that. But if you could de-average and figure out who are the people you really need to reach and when, then you can really start to make the model work. And that's what a lot of the tech companies or a lot of the sort of the goals of the wearable and the analytic companies are really trying to do that. They're trying to say, well, how can you take a broad population and really focus our attention and focus the best attention on what these particular people need when they need it.
The behavior argument sounds really powerful to me, because as I've been doing this show, the first thing you learn about genomics, if you get your own, genome sequence or your 23andMe data, back when you could get it, is what can I do? And the answer is usually eat better and exercise more, which we already knew.
Right.
Right? And so then becomes the question, how can you actually do that? And so wearables have this chance to influence our behavior. Yeah. Now, one thing I like about you two is you cut through the hype quite well, I think, because there's a lot of hype around wearables, around digital health. You've had to as an investor. You just like to, as a writer, I guess. And David, you were a doctor, and so you were grounded in the actual healthcare system. What are some, maybe a couple examples
I think that
of wearables or digital health that are being integrated now?
I think that, I think that there are some promising platforms out there when you think about something like Propeller Health. The idea is Propeller Health is a platform that tries to measure, it's a device that sits on an inhaler and records every time that it's used. Initially it just sat on a rescue inhaler. Now I believe that the next edition sits on a variety of different ones. The idea is that it allows a physician managing a panel of patients with asthma or COPD to figure out which ones are starting to get in trouble and intervene. On the other hand, there are intermediate data. They presented some data at a conference that was not their final data, but some early data, and they claimed to show some cost benefits, which are always questionable, but they didn't show any impact on sort of the asthma severity score, which if they were impacting something, you would expect them to do. So I think there are a lot of things that would seem intuitive, that seem, well, you just do this and it should work. But that's why you do the experiment, because it doesn't always work. And I think that this is...
So we're in the experiment phase.
Yeah, so I think, I think you have to look at it from two sides. I mean, there's technologies, and whether it's wearables or stick-onables or ingestibles or what have you, there's all kinds of interesting technology that can deal with both and identify the issues both around eat right, sleep well, lose weight, the duh stuff, and the real medical stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have... you're having tremors from Parkinson's, and we may need to titrate your meds, or you're having arrhythmia that we can see by this wearable you're wearing, or whatever.
Pre-diabetic.
Yeah.
Or something
well,
like
pre-diabetic can't be really checked that way,
that
but
may come from
nevertheless,
a molecular
right.
test.
That's probably
right, like the Mike Snyder test.
There's actually a company out there that can do a non-invasive 5, or 1 minute test. You lay your arm and it actually will tell you if you're pre-diabetic, but with no blood and no fasting. But nevertheless, there's products out there.
Supposedly.
But the issue isn't whether you know that, it's what you do about it, to your point. And so I think the real holy grail at this point is, how do you change behavior? And I think there's a lot more to learn from the consumer products world than there is from the healthcare world about that. The healthcare world is not very, first of all, the healthcare world looks at mental health and that whole thing that leads to behavioral change as second-class citizenry, by and large. Mm-hmm. And secondly, the medical world doesn't think about people as consumers and buyers of product. They think about them as patients. If you go over to the consumer products world, they know how to market. They know how to sell stuff. Disney knows how to make you do stuff.
And this would be good for healthcare.
I think it'd be great for
More
healthcare.
consumerization.
Because, getting people, if the real answer for most problems, and not every problem, I don't want to minimize it, but for many problems is eat better, lose weight, exercise, sleep better, that's about helping people be motivated to change what they do every day. It's not about giving them a bunch of data.
Mm-hmm. On the other hand, these are very complicated problems. There are these experts at Stanford who are who are really good at getting people to do games, and who specialize in making these ultra addictive games. And so the idea has been, well, it's led to a couple of things. One, well, let's sort of gamify health. And I think that where the idea is, you set up these reward systems and give badges and stuff, and I think there's been a lot of promise, but I think whether or not that's really durably changed behavior is a question. And then there's this whole idea of sort of micro achievements, where the idea is you sort of get people to do something big by rewarding them for doing a variety, in sort of micro increments. And again, I think that's sort of very appealing, but then the question is, what is the, I know I keep coming back to what's the evidence. I think it's incredibly appealing, and a lot of these platforms, for just the reason Lisa talks about, should be very effective, or should have the opportunity to be effective, and are clearly something to strongly consider. But then you say, okay, well, what's the evidence that they really are durably changing behavior versus something that sort of people do for a little bit and then stop? So I think the approach is, you look around here and you can't help but being inspired by the technology and think that there really is something to these sort of approaches. But I think that
if you go and look at Coca-Cola,
right,
and they've created a brand that people will drink that crap for every day for the rest of their life, knowing full well it's bad for you and everything else. If you could take the lesson from that to teach people to not do it,
to do the preventative,
to do the opposite, not drink soda, which is probably one of the worst things you could possibly do for yourself. If we could learn how to translate that kind of marketing knowledge and consumer engagement experience and branding into healthcare, you might make a difference at some of these things.
But it's not just branding. I mean, part of it is that it's actually enjoyable to drink Coca-Cola, and you're trying to make people drink Coke versus Pepsi. Whereas to say, okay, don't eat, exercise more, it's sort of a
negative reward.
Let's talk about some paradigm shifts that are happening or need to happen. I mean, you talk about let's consumerize this more, and then you start talking about the consumer versus the patient, right? And I know this was a theme on your first podcast, where, and we hear a lot about it, and there's this new book out by Eric Topol, The Patient Will See You Now. So reversal there. Is this paradigm taking off?
It is and it isn't.
Is it taking place in Indiana and Wisconsin?
Yeah. What's happening is as with all things, follow the money. So as more and more high deductible health plans are taking over, insurance, people who have insurance are being forced to pay more and more things out of pocket. And the more you put the money in the hand of the person paying for something, the more aware they become of what things cost.
Become much more price sensitive.
Yeah, they become more price sensitive.
That's
exactly
been
right.
one of the problems with our healthcare system, is we became insensitive, right? It began with Medicare in the 60s and the whole insurance model.
Exactly.
We were not in touch with what we were paying.
That's part of the problem, but it's a big piece of the problem, I think. And I think, as people are getting more and more devastated, frankly, by the out-of-pocket cost of healthcare, they're becoming much more aware of how to shop for it, how to think about it. Not necessarily so sophisticated about taking great care of themselves, but it's a process, right? So, as people become more educated about this and there's more and more discussion about it out in open, I think there'll be more evidence of.
And that's the appeal of
change.
things like Castlight.
Castlight, what's that?
So Castlight is a company that was backed by Venrock, went public, I think it was last year, and it was based on the idea that you should be able to understand, you should essentially be able to shop and compare.
Price shop for services.
Right.
Okay, so just an app for that.
Basically.
More sophisticated than that, but yeah, and to sort of give people insight who have high deductible plans. Employers would actually buy it who have high deductible plans for their employees, and it would be a tool to empower the employees to shop intelligently and to use their to spend the money to their deductible wisely.
Now, there's an assumption here. So I like to talk about the 23andMe story, the side of it where it's a company, it's a startup who's actually impacting healthcare through consumerization, going directly to consumers. And as David and I were discussing, did a lot of education. People know about genomics through 23andMe. And I know
people here in Silicon Valley, I'm not sure how widespread that knowledge really is. I'm not sure if the people in Indiana are thinking about 23andMe.
Okay, but they do have 800,000 customers, right? So that's
about the San Jose population, something like that.
It's all of San Jose.
It probably is heavily concentrated.
So is that something we'll see more of? And is that a new paradigm? Education through entrepreneurs?
Maybe. I'm sure we'll see more of it because everybody likes to know stuff about themselves. But what is the real straight line between that and doing something about your health? I don't know. In some cases, in very few cases, I think there's probably very obvious things that need to be done for genetic counseling for people who have imminent problems that they need to deal with, and maybe they can forestall or whatever. But for the most part, this tells you things like someday, if the moon aligns with Mercury, you might get Alzheimer's. Now, what am I supposed to do about that?
But what about just that first step of even thinking about our genes?
It's important. I agree it's important, and I wouldn't denigrate it as a concept theoretically, but I'd rather get people to think about their weight right now. I think you got to start way back at what's meaningful in the moment for people.
But I also think there's a broader role of entrepreneurs in activating, in activating patients and activating customers. Sure. I was thinking about one of our upcoming guests, Kathy, right? Whereas a key aspect of what her company does is sort of make people comfortable with the product.
Kelly, you mean Kelly?
Yeah, product that she sells.
Kelly Brzozowski at Butterfly.
Yeah.
Okay. Making what?
Getting people to put words around what's wrong with them and to be able to talk about it and be able to engage about it.
Okay. And just the therapeutic effect of that.
Yeah, and also empowering them. The social networking aspect, the peer-to-peer engagement aspect, or opportunity for healthcare is very significant. It's well known that if people can talk to others like themselves with conditions and problems, and this is the foundation for companies like Patients Like Me, for instance, that it is therapeutically valuable to them.
And that's exactly what Sandy Pentland, who wrote Social Physics and whose research is the basis of companies like Ginger.io, talk about. They say you can use these sort of, Twitter and all this stuff to communicate, almost to communicate superficially to people. But everything that really results in significant behavioral change is from virtually everything. It's from direct one-on-one sort of relationships that people have and from their very close social network.
So we had to jump from Twitter to a personal relationship to get the book written, but
exactly, and to get the full health benefits.
Exactly. But it's true. In mental health and substance abuse, group therapy, for instance, is a major part of treatment. It's essential to treatment in many cases, to getting people better. And I think that concept is underutilized in other parts of medical care, and the advent of Facebook and Patients Like Me and other engagement platforms where people can find each other when they have a problem is hugely valuable. It's just beginning to be harnessed, as a medical opportunity.
So as a company that's an example of a company that's trying to do this is Omada Health. So Omada Health is trying to prevent people who are at risk for diabetes, like we were talking about, from really developing diabetes. And it's based on some NIH-backed research that showed that there's a really strong effect of behavioral behavioral intervention. What this is trying to do is deliver what sort of study nurses at MGH Diabetes Center were able to do incredibly effectively, but deliver it through sort of a combination of a virtual coach delivered sort of through the internet, but also by having the people, a small group of people who are involved, like 10 or 12 people who are all in the same position and geographically co-located. So even though the coach comes through the internet, the people themselves get together, or
Weight Watchers model.
Right, or get together, or to walk and to do things, and they actually apparently form like important social relationships that come from this. So it really is trying to combine. I think one of the things I like about Omada Health, and I think has really incorporates a lot of exciting design principles, is that it's, on the one hand, it's based on some very sort of hardcore research, and on the other hand, it uses the internet not as this sort of thing to be fetishized. Oh, here's some amazing technology, but really in service of some really important principles that, I don't know if it's going to work, but I think it has a very good shot, because I think that they're employing technologies in a very sophisticated way.
I wonder sometimes on the program, we talk health a lot, of course, and we're all three in the health industry. But the best thing in life is when you don't have to think about your health.
Right.
Is that right?
Of course.
And so with all the wearables technology and the social media apps and digital health, we're all obsessing over health more. It has
the young and healthy, really.
Well, I have this theory, which maybe it'll prove to be wrong, but I have this theory that it's going to make us a nation of hypochondriacs to a certain extent.
Yeah.
If you're constantly staring at your data, you're constantly worrying.
Or, yeah, and also focus maybe on the wrong goals.
Potentially.
I mean, does it make us want to live more and more and more and more successful if we live longer or something?
Depends on the person. People are, here's the problem. There's no such thing as the people. There's different people with different motivations that have different problems day to day. You know, if you're a single mother of 3 kids and you're living in a, a really difficult area and you're trying to work, you're trying to take care of your kids, and you're going to stop on your way home for McDonald's for food because it's cheap and fast, that's a solution to a different problem that you have, but you may be creating another one. So you really have to think about people in the context of their environment when you think about healthcare. And I think, motivate people in the way they can be motivated. It has to come to them in a way. And, there's a company, Frame Health, that's thinking about that a lot. I know, they're using actually psychological profiling like they use when you hire people. To profile people into what would be the kind of things that motivate that set of people as opposed to all people. And I just think, I don't know if it's going to be successful, but it's a promising idea of how do you segment people based on the kinds of things that motivate them and the kinds of challenges they have, so you can create interventions, whatever they may be, high tech, low tech, whatever, to change their behavior.
So I'm curious, you were just at a meeting, you said, with some venture capitalists.
Yes, I was.
In the tech side of things, who were asking about health.
Yes.
What did you tell them?
I told them I thought it was smart that they were asking people in the healthcare world to help them, because I think that...
as opposed to just thinking they can come up with it
well, I think
at the kitchen table.
The advantage of coming from the tech world to the healthcare world without a lot of healthcare knowledge is you have fresh eyes, and you have knowledge from another industry that's been very successful in incorporating technology to make things better, faster, efficient, whatever, customer friendly. The disadvantage is that you don't necessarily understand all the weird and silly arcane rules and traditions and things that are very hard to overcome. Coming from the healthcare world, it's great because you understand all those things, and you may have contacts and relationships and understand the processes and what works and what doesn't work. But you may not be able to see outside your own box, and look for all those new and interesting things that are being done, like in social networking, for instance, or in games, or whatever, and bring those in. So you really need both sets of people, I think, to solve these problems.
And that would be some really fun meetings, huh?
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're at a company where you got so many engineers and tech people. Maybe they outnumber.
It is.
I'm
by far the least qualified person in my company. So it's a great place to be.
How
Me too at mine.
How will genomics take hold in 2015 in the clinic?
Oh my gosh.
What are you excited about?
It's an amazingly...
You just had a deal you announced today with Natera, prenatal diagnostics company.
Oh, right, exactly. I mean, it's an amazingly exciting time to be in genomics because now that with the arrival of next generation sequencing, there's so much information that's coming through. People are actually starting to ask a couple of questions. Well, first of all, how are we going to manage all the information? And obviously, the DNAnexus cloud platform has demonstrated it's a fantastic solution to this challenge. And then there's sort of the next order question, saying, well, even if once you're able to collect and organize all the genetic information, it's to make it really valuable, you really have to integrate other types of data. So I'm very excited about essentially evolving this towards an integrated health data platform where you're able to integrate health, you're able to integrate sort of EMR data, you're able to integrate wearable data.
You'll be selling to providers?
I think the opportunity would be to enable hospitals to provide better care for their patients, to enable pharmaceutical companies to inform their R&D, and all while keeping the data in a secure environment that's shareable among authorized users in a broader and broader network. To which essentially the more people that are hooked up, the more powerful it becomes.
So you've just started this new podcast. Who, if you could have anyone, would you like to have on the program?
Wow, what a great question. Pardon me. Nothing like a sick healthcare person here. I actually think it would be really interesting to have the person who runs that healthcare education program at Disney on. I think that would be fascinating. To talk to some of these people, or the person who's ideating healthcare over at Apple. Some of the people who are crossing over. I think that would be kind of fun.
And get a picture of both worlds and just see how far they've crossed over into health, or
what they're thinking about. Why do they want to do this? Because it's certainly not an easy industry to get into and succeed in. So what is it that they think they know that others haven't learned? And I think that's really interesting. I think it's also interesting. It would be interesting to have the CEOs of a couple of the big healthcare institutions, healthcare systems, the Cleveland Clinic or Dignity Health or whatever, to talk about how much their business is really changing, because they really are changing in a big way in response to regulation, in response to insurance pressure, in response to consumer-ism.
So just try and get a snapshot of what's going on there.
Yeah, my daughter keeps pushing for us to get Craig Breslow, the Sandy Koufax of our generation, the Red Sox pitcher who trained as a molecular, as a biochem major at Yale and is now pitching for the Red Sox, and keeps pushing us to try to get him on the show.
That would work for me. I like baseball too, as you want to.
That's right.
Well, you've done 2 shows, right?
Yeah. Well, we've actually taped 4.
Okay. I've heard the first one. I loved it. I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Wow, that means a lot.
Thank you for coming on our program.
Delighted to be here.
Thank you so much.
David Shaywitz of DNAnexus, Lisa Suennen, and they are the producers of the Tech Tonics Podcast. And that's our show for today. Thank you for joining us.
Today's show is sponsored by 23andMe, the leading personal genetics company.